Mankind discovered how to make glass thousands of years ago, and the Roman historian Pliny tells at least a plausible story about how this was done. He tells how Phoenician traders were carrying a cargo of blocks of natron, and they used some of these to hold their cooking pots around their fire on the beach. The natron then fused with the sand, and in the morning, when the fire had cooled, they found glass. Whatever the truth of this particular story, something like this must surely have happened. Glass is one of man's oldest technologies, and the first known vessels date from about 3,500 years ago in Egypt. They were made by dipping a core mould into molten glass and then turning it so as to coat the mould completely with the glass. After slow cooling, the mould was then removed to leave the vessel. The next major development took place about 2,000 years ago when glass blowing was invented in the Eastern Mediterranean, which was then part of the Roman Empire. The Romans, of course, were outstanding engineers and technologists and developed glass manufacture to a fine art, using glass of similar composition to that used today. The single most famous glass object in existence is probably the porcelain vase, dating from about 400 AD. It is a cameo vase blown from blue glass overlain with white glass into which a mythological scene has been carved. Glass blowing then spread throughout the Roman world and beyond, particularly to the Rhineland, but the fall of the Roman Empire led to a decline. In the 13th century, Venice became the dominant centre of glassmaking. And already in 1291 it was so important that because of the frequent fires in the city, glassmaking was transferred to the island of Murano, where it is practiced to this day. And this also helped to preserve the trade secrets. One of the most notable developments made possible by using pure materials was that of crystallo glass, which was clear and strong and could be blown into very fine, thin shapes. The Venetians were unable to guard their secrets forever, and glassmaking spread throughout Europe. Eventually, of course, to England, where a major advance was made in 1674 when George Ravenscroft produced lead glass, often misleadingly known as lead crystal because it is so highly transparent. This contains up to 60% lead oxide for the best quality glasses and gives a beautiful bright glass, easily worked and cut, and is now used in most decorative tableware. Many other advances have followed in subsequent years in the production of beautiful objects, but perhaps most notably in the development of smart glasses and in mass production techniques. Many inventions using glass had been made already by the start of the 18th century. Spectacles in 1260, silvered mirrors from the 14th century, the increasing use of windows from the same period, microscopes in 1596, telescopes in 1608, the barometer in 1644. Inventions continued to be made after this period, of course. And an obvious example is the camera, which almost everybody possesses today, and this came into general use about the beginning of the 20th century. The most obvious and indeed influential use of glass today is for windows, which came into general use from the 14th century with the development of two production techniques. The first is the crown process. A bulb of glass is blown, which is transferred to another blowing rod, and the rod is then spun very rapidly to turn the bulb into a cylinder. And it's spun more and more rapidly, faster and faster, until the bulb becomes a disc, from which the windows are cut, as you can see here. and you can still see such windows in old buildings today. The second process is the cylinder process, in which again a glass bulb is blown. It's reheated. And after reheating, it's taken and swung over a pit so that the bulb becomes a cylinder. Which is then evened out in shape. The ends are cut off. Sliced down the middle to make a cut cylinder. It's reheated, and in the furnace the cylinder opens out to become a flat sheet, loaded into the annealing oven, cooled slowly, and eventually stacked ready for use. Such glass was used widely in the 19th century, best known the Crystal Palace, built for the Great Exhibition of 1851. The cylinder method was eventually industrialized, as you can see on this image here. Then it was replaced by the sheet process, which involved pulling a sheet of glass continuously from a molten batch in the furnace tank. This gives a very clear glass suitable for normal windows, but not for mirrors or cars or large shop windows for which it's too thin. These needs were met with plate glass, which involved casting glass onto a table, rolling, annealing, grinding and polishing. But in the 20s, the process was improved when the glass was rolled into a sheet between mechanical rollers, and this process was further developed to its final stage of perfection in the 30s with the rolling of a continuous sheet, which was then ground and polished on both sides simultaneously before being cut into plates ready for use. All of the above processes have now been replaced, except for very specialized applications, by the float process, which was invented by Alistair Pilkington and developed by the firm of Pilkington in the 1950s. This is very simple in concept, but difficult in technical execution. The glass from the melting furnace is floated onto the surface of a bath of molten tin, enclosed in a hydrogen atmosphere to prevent oxidation of the tin. Because the surface of the molten metal is perfectly flat, then so is the glass. The glass ribbon cools as it flows across the tin and emerges when it is hard enough to suffer no damage or distortion as it flows onwards through the annealing oven. Then it is cut to size, ready for use. The availability of float glass has completely transformed the appearance of our city, as can be seen in these shots here. Also, you can see the effect of the different colours and tints which are possible now and are there to control the environment in the buildings. There is, of course, one problem with such extensive use of glass. It needs cleaning. Very recently, the self-cleaning glass which has been developed will reduce very considerably the need for this in the future.